the soft plastic lizard. This old school creature bait can be used in nearly any condition, in almost any rig style, and has consistently proven to catch big fish. The problem is, most anglers are intimidated by all these wiggly limbs and trying to figure out what's the best time to use it. So what we're gonna do today is we're going to compare 3 different companies' lizards, show you how to rig them, how to fish them, as well as when and the best color options to use given the conditions.
These multi-armed, narrow soft plastics excel in a variety of tasks with their ability to undulate with very little movement and very little current. They are a phenomenal finesse bait that can be jigged, Ned rigged, dead stick, fished weightless and topwater, or any number of Carolina or Texas rigs. They can come in everything from highly realistic lizard colors and hail colors for high visibility, high water clarity areas when fish may not be so key to strike out of the ordinary baits, all the way up to highly contrasting colors like black, purple, and chartreuse, which excel in low light and low visibility conditions where the outline is going to make the most difference.
Now, when we're talking about presenting baits that are similar to the forage in the area, most people are going to say, I've never seen a lizard swimming in my local bass pond. And for most anglers, you're not going to be wrong with that. Lizards are not the thing that we see frequently in ponds. However, if you take a few minutes on your walk down to the lake, you may notice that there are anoles, geckos, agamas, iguanas.
Hold on.
Those animals do end up falling into the water, whether from an overhanging tree branch, getting washed in from the rain. Any combination of reasons could get a lizard into the water. In most of the country, there are also amphibians, newts that spend most of their time in the water, or salamanders that will spend some of their time in the water. Which brings us to, when is the ideal time to fish a lizard bait? If you are going for what the available forage is at peak times of year, lizards are going to more naturally present in the spring. A little science trivia for you: amphibians do not lay their eggs in dry areas. They do not have hard shells. Most amphibians, most newts, frogs, and salamanders need to put their eggs in water, standing water. The result is, in the spring, there will be more lizard-shaped objects, delicious, squishy lizard-shaped objects for bass to eat. Spring is also a time in which there is often less weed cover, less lily pads, less duckweed, less hydrilla. It can be fished in drop-offs, can be fished around cover that later in the season, in the summer and early fall, may be too choked with weeds to effectively present a multi-armed soft plastic. Now we're going to talk about 3 different lizards. As you can see here, we've got our PowerBait Power Lizard, our Zoom Super Salt Plus Lizard, and our Yum Lizard. Now all of these have a very similar overall shape, but some differences that you may choose to focus on based on how you're fishing and where you're fishing. The first bait on our list is the Berkley PowerBait Power Lizard. Now, this is a 6-inch rubber lizard, which, because it's a Berkley PowerBait product, has a little bit of an oily residue as well as a classic PowerBait scent to it, which is a cool bonus with their soft plastics. Now, one thing that separates this lizard from some of the others is the broader tail and legs. This adds to the buoyancy as well as the water displacement when it's fished higher in the water column. I like to rig this as a weedless, weightless item and fish it around lily pads and areas where you would traditionally fish a surface bait. This one, as you can see here, is a black and blue. those darker colors and the contrast help when fishing in more stained water. They tend to fish areas that have runoff and they tend to not be super clear. And that color combination, of course, as you can see on a white background, really silhouettes the lizard. Not to mention, it looks a lot like a spotted salamander or red striped salamander, amphibians that we have locally here in North Carolina. Now, the OG or original lizard here is our Zoom Super Salt Plus 6-inch lizard. The Super Salt style of Zoom soft plastics are salt impregnated, so they have more density in the rubber, in the gel. And as a result, these sink. They are an excellent option when you're punching pads or attempting to work deeper structure, because that added weight helps bring them down to the bottom and you don't have to worry quite as much about beefing up your tackle to accomplish that. They also have a slightly narrower profile and compared to the body size have a very wide and long tendrils for their tail and their arms and legs. These are one of the go-tos for anglers targeting those deeper areas such as rock piles, as well as heavy vegetation where some of the wider baits may get gummed up and lose some of their action. This one is again a 6-inch and it is in the black with red glitter. This is another option that I really enjoy using in darker conditions. It makes an excellent bait to fish at night because all you're gonna see, again, silhouetted against something light, is this profile. As a lizard, reptile, and amphibian nerd, this also looks quite a bit like your classic eastern newt or red-backed salamander. I don't think the fish are gonna turn up one species of amphibian for another, but it is cool when you can match the hatch, for lack of a better term. Next, we have our Yum lizard. The Yum brand soft plastics are one that you can find nearly anywhere, and I find them a phenomenal product when rigging any of my soft plastics. This one you can see is another 6-inch in green pumpkin is the color on it. These Yum lizards have a little bit longer and thinner of a tail, as well as thinner arms and legs, as well as a little bit more texture on the body and head. What I found particularly useful about these is they work really well as a finesse bait because of how light all of these appendages are and how the current can just ever so slightly move this bait when you have ridges like you see here on the torso. So if you're looking for a finesse bait, I recommend going with the Yum. This works really well if you're trying to downsize or lighten up your gear. Would also make a really great Ned option because of how much action you get with very little movement. With this one, I opted for a more natural green pumpkin color. It's still dark enough that it works in stained and transitional water, but has a more natural coloration and also works very well in your clearer water. So one question you may be asking is, what size lizard should you get? That is going to depend on where you're fishing and what you're fishing for. Odds are you're trying to target bass and you are also trying to match whatever the forage is in your area. If you were fishing further south, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Louisiana, areas where you have larger lizards up to the size of iguanas in some places, you could certainly opt for a larger lizard. If you are somewhere further north where your bait choices are going to be smaller, maybe even things like crayfish, if you were fishing these as a Jig-Head or a Texas rig, you could certainly opt for a smaller, maybe 4-inch option, or in areas where you have pressured fish that are going to be turned off by a large presentation. We're going to start by showing you how to fish a Texas rig. Now in this case, the Texas rig has the weight, hook, and soft plastic all attached to the leader line, allowing for that bait to stay closer to the bottom, almost acting as a jig. So while I have our barrel swivel here attached to our leader line, I'm going to attach it up to the main line as well with just a very simple fisherman's knot. In this case, I am using braid as my main line and fluorocarbon as my leader line. So got that line-to-line connection there. And now we'll do about a foot to a foot and a half of leader line. We're going to take our bullet sinker that we have here. This is a 3/16, and slide it on nose first. After your weight, you are going to want to affix a bead. These little glass or plastic beads not only help from preventing smashing of the knot that you're going to tie your hook to, but they also add noise when you're fishing this through the water column. When you draw it in tight, it's going to add some audibility. Now that we've got our weight and our bead, we're going to go ahead and attach that offset worm hook. For this demonstration, I'm just going to use a very simple fisherman's knot as well. Keep it consistent. Back through the eye, or I should say back through the bite. Pull that tight, pull the tag tight, not hook yourself on the finger like I am trying to do. Now, for all intents and purposes, we have our completed Texas rig. All we need to do now is thread our lizard. I like to make a little incision where I'm going to poke that hole. And with your offset worm hooks, you are going to want to take just a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch or so of that soft plastic and poke it through so that it sits close to that eye. And that's going to keep it from getting pulled out when you're casting and you're fishing. And we're going to poke it through the belly, and there you go. Now that hook point is going to lay flat, hopefully not get caught on anything. And as this drops through the water, that weight is going to go down first. And as you retrieve, it's going to bring the bait down to that weight, and they're going to come up again. And they're going to be able to seesaw down through the water. If you would like to keep that sinker up near the bait itself so that it can punch through lily pads and just stay almost on the bottom like a jig, you can purchase stoppers. You can also take a stick or a toothpick and drive it into this opening, and it's going to keep that from sliding.
In the Texas rig, you want that weight to be right there next to the bait. So you don't put anything up top unless you want to. This is going to allow it to punch through cover, sit on the bottom much better. I'm not going to dead stick it because that weight is positioned right in front of the hook, more like a jig. So we're going to bounce this, cast it just beyond where the current is, and bounce it up and through. This should allow it to be carried with the current back downstream and provide plenty of flutter action near the bottom.
Now, what's the difference between a Texas rig and a Carolina rig? It's where the weight is. On a Carolina rig, it is in front of the barrel swivel. After you've attached your soft plastic lizard, I'll show you how this is going to look a little different. It's doing a simple fisherman's knot here again. One of my favorite line to nearly anything connections because it is repeatable and it is easy to learn and produces a nice rugged setup. I don't like seeing all that tag, so I'm going to trim that back a little bit here with my pliers. So you have your soft plastic. Now you have a 12 to 18 inch leader, and then you have your weight. And this weight can free slide much the same way. The difference now is that this bait is going to be able to come up in the water column. If you're using one of the floating options, like I mentioned, it's going to rise up in the water column. It's also going to stay above the debris on the bottom. If you're dealing with areas that have very short vegetation, especially in the spring where those weed beds are starting again and hydrilla and such might be reduced, this is a great way to keep it up above that and in the hunting zone of your bass. If you're fishing areas with current, this also means that this rig is going to float up in the waterways. If you're fishing spillways, dams, and rivers, this is a great option to keep that in the strike zone with very little movement on your part. We are running a Carolina rig. This one, we are using the Berkley Power Lizard 6-inch. This is in a black fleck with a blue tail. Again, a darker color because of our overcast conditions and low light, as well as the relatively dark color of our water here. And I am doing just a little pop and retrieve, working this bait near the bottom, but allowing there to be plenty of action in the retrieve. And remember, from our Carolina rig video, you do want a little bit more of a lobbing cast due to the fact that that weight is sitting up on top of the rig. It's going to swing out first, and the result is sometimes if you put a little bit too much whip into it, is you're going to get caught up and your leader line and main line are basically just going to twist because your soft plastic is helicoptering around the weight. Carolina rigs exceed expectations when fished in areas with current. This is one of those special spots that, because we've had so much rain as well, the water is absolutely plunging off of this weir. So we are going to cast out and hop it and slowly drag it across the bottom, allowing that lizard to come up through the water column and attract fish that are hopefully waiting for lizards, snakes, fish, whatever gets washed downstream. And I am letting a little extra line out to allow that bait to almost dead stick in the current. One of the other nice aspects about that Carolina rig is that the weight, because it can move up the line when it wants to, almost can act like a fish finder rig. One of the techniques while fishing soft lizards that is always a great choice is a jig. Here I've got a couple of different jig heads. However, there are dozens of other options based on how you want to fish, where you want to fish, from weedless to different colors, different weights, different shapes. We're using the classic lead head jig to tie this. Now for this example, I'm just going to be using some of my 15-pound fluorocarbon leader to tie this. And I'm going to be using a Palomar knot to affix this. Usually you would want to feed a bite or a loop through this eye. However, my fingers are not that accurate, so I'm going to pull loop through and feed the end back, like you see here. So you got tag end running out the same way back to your reel. You're going to use this and create a real simple hitch, like so. You're going to take your loop, bring it over the hook, back towards that eye, and then you're gonna pull tight. It may take a couple of attempts to get all of the slack out of your line, a couple of extra pulls here and there, and then you're gonna wanna remove your extra tag line here. I'm just gonna use a pair of pliers to do it with. Knife, scissors, or line clippers all work really well. There you have your Palomar knot, and you're gonna wanna feed this hook onto the soft plastic. There's not a ton of definition in these. However, with the slight change in body shape, you do want to keep the eyes facing towards that jig eye. So you're gonna poke it through the nose and feed, feed, feed. Now, this particular jig head does have a keeper, as you can see here, and that is going to slide into the soft plastic and hold it in place. That one got a little scrunched up while I was talking to you. However, you can see the body in that jig head. Admittedly, the shank on this jig head is a little short. We'd want that hook to be a little further back in the body, as this is going to go bouncing across the bottom like so. We want to keep that hook a little further back.
Now, Jig heads come in a variety of shapes and sizes, depending on how deep and the structure that you want to fish. What we have here is your classic lead head ball style jig. These are unpainted with a standard hook. It can be purchased just about anywhere. However, if you're looking for areas that have a lot of cover, weed beds and rocky areas, stump beds, things like that, opt for a weedless style jig head that will usually have a wire or hard monofilament cover in front of that hook. That'll allow less debris to end up getting snagged in the crook of that hook. Now we have something on the bottom right over here. Might be a carp, might be some bass rooting around, I'm not sure yet. So I am going to run this bait caster, get it down to the bottom and see what we're working with. This is designed to get all the way down to the bottom. I am using some relatively heavy braided line on my loose speed stick and 6.6. Now you have a couple of different options for how you may want to retrieve this bait. You can jig it, as the name would imply, popping the rod tip. And what that's going to do is cause that bait to come up in the water column and drop back down. Those soft plastic tendrils that you saw are going to do a lot of fluttering as it's moving through the water column. And then even as it sits on the bottom, those are going to move ever so slightly as well. In areas that you may have more of a sandy bottom, you can just do a drag. In doing so, you're going to cause some commotion as well as kick up some mud and dust.
Now we're going to be going for a weightless, weedless setup for our lizard. Here I've got my PowerBait Power Lizard and a variety of different hooks that you may be familiar with and one you might not be. We have a Gamakatsu offset worm hook. We have an Eagle Claw extra wide gap worm hook. And then we have a BKK twist lock. And I'm going to use the twist lock because in some of our other videos, we've covered the other two styles. For continuity's sake, I am going to use a Palomar knot again to tie my fluorocarbon leader. Mono, in this case, would work just fine because this is a floating rig. So having the extra buoyancy of the monofilament is a great asset. Now with these twist locks, you do want to make sure that you get the line back to the eye. Trim that tag so it's not slapping me while I'm talking. Now, twist locks look a little bit different because as opposed to the offset that you see here on these worm hooks, you are actually going to hold your soft plastic in place by corkscrewing this into the nose. And now that's not going to go anywhere. And it's also not going to slide up or down the shank like you see with some of our traditional hooks. The BKK also has a little rubber stopper here to keep the soft plastic body sitting up closer to the shank, which is a great option when you're rigging these weedless. Now just drive that through the belly there. Probably important to measure before you do so because there isn't a lot of curvature on these. It does take some getting used to. Again, for example's sake, you can move that little rubber piece up and now you have a hook shank that is well below the bait, giving plenty of space for that bass's lip to get hooked. And this we can drag through weed beds, through lily pads. We can even fish this over timber if we really wanted to. And that's going to swim very freely with very little disturbance in the water and make an excellent largemouth bass hook.
Now, over in this little hidden pocket of heavy cover and depth transitions, we are fishing with the unweighted lizard. This color combination and brand is the Zoom Super Salt 6-inch lizard in a red fleck. You can see we have red sparkle patterns through a black translucent pattern. And we are fishing this unweighted on a 2/0 offset worm hook. This is going to keep the rig mostly snag proof. And because we're running such a light setup here with no weight, I'm using my Finesse 7-foot St. Croix Triumph 2500 Shimano FX with my 15-pound braid. You could absolutely go lighter than that. And this I am going to fish near the surface, allowing those curled legs to work almost as a propeller, making a wake through the water.
I am moving it just fast enough to keep that tail and arms moving while keeping it subsurface. You can pause and give it a twitch. When you do so, you're going to change the direction that it's heading, and it's going to start dropping back in the water column. When you do that, you can usually trigger a strike from a fish that may be following the bait and unsure if they want to commit. That rapid change is kind of like playing hard to get and triggers a reaction strike.
Those darker colors are going to silhouette better. So your purples, your dark reds, your June bugs, your black are all going to work better in these conditions because it's going to be easier for the fish to see that contrast. That logic is the same at night as well, because the Zoom Super Salt is a salt impregnated plastic. This will also sink. So if I want to cast back up and towards the cover, it will start to sink as on a slack line, and I can fish it a little more like you would see me fish a wacky rig, getting it to sink and flutter down towards the bottom, kind of like a lizard or newt that is struggling to get up to the surface.
An unweighted lizard will work to be dead sticked if there's a little bit of current. I don't recommend dead sticking a lizard in a non-current area like I'm fishing right now, because the way that the hook is rigged, as well as the overall size of the body, means that it usually ends up just laying flat on the bottom. So it doesn't have any tendrils that are sticking up like you would see on something like a Ned rig.
Whether you plan on bouncing your lizard off the bottom in a Texas rig, punching pads on a jig, or fishing at topwater, the lizard is a versatile soft plastic that deserves a space in your tackle box. So go ahead, try one on.